Last time we talked about why having an understanding around sexual issues was important. And this session will help you further understand that because love and intimacy are about being able to understand our differences and being able to be supportive no matter what those differences are. And so when you look at what I want from love and intimacy, those other things become really important. Love is like one of those four-letter words. It's very difficult to define. And so what I used to do in my classroom is I would ask my students to bring me in a symbol of love. And we would talk about love. And out of that, we would create our own definition of love for the classroom. And I have to tell you, grandparents came up a lot. Pictures of grandparents and family came up a lot. And even, there would be a baseball hat because of someone who loved the Red Sox, or someone brought in their guitar. Someone brought in a fiance one day, because these were all what they saw as symbols of love. So it's really important for you to create your own definition of love. Your own best expert on this issue. The other thing about love is more than just a feeling. It's an action. In order for us to understand what love was and create our definition, we had to know what love looked like. So when I asked students what they meant, why that picture was important to them of their grandparents, what was it about their grandparents that made them think that they were being loved? And it was your support. It was you were there, you understood, you were there when they needed you. You would comfort them when they were hurt. You were a safe place for them to go to talk about issues that were going on in their lives. So you start to see that it's this symbol can help them understand and help you understand what it is that love really looks like when it's in action. If you go to the next slide. There's a definition of love. It's called the triangle of love, and it says it has basically three components: passion, commitment, and intimacy. Now, if you're looking for a long-term relationship, you want to have all three. You want to have passion and commitment and intimacy. And this is not necessarily just a sexual relationship. This is, parents have this for their children. Parents, our grandparent would have this for a grandchild. I have a grandchild that I adore. I have a lot of feelings for that child. He's a man now, but I still have those same feelings. He means a lot to me. And I've been very, committed to him. I spent a lot of time with him while he was growing up. We used to go playground crawling. I'd take him, we would drive all over to go to different playgrounds. It was just a huge commitment to me, making sure that I spent enough time with him so that he knew me and could always come back to me. And then there's the intimacy, the sharing of ourselves, and about what's important to us and what's not important to us and what we want to do. Now, if it's long-term, you want all three. If it's a friendship, you're probably looking at commitment and intimacy. A friendship is something that goes on for years. I have friends that I've had since middle school, and they know everything about me and I know everything about them and their lives. So there's a lot, but there's no passion. We're not physically involved. For hooking up, it's passion. You're there for the sex, and you want to have some kind of, you're looking for a good sexual experience. But there's really no commitment for long-term, unless it's a friends with benefits and you plan to do this for a while, or and there's no real need for sharing of intimacy or sharing anything about yourselves. And I'll talk a little bit more about the difference between long-term commitments and hooking up. There are some differences, and it depends on what you're looking for. Can you take me to the next one, please? Love exists in all cultures, in all ethnic groups, in all orientations. It's a fallacy to think that gay people don't love each other, And it's a fallacy to think that they can't be in long-term commitments. There's I mentioned that dual nature about love. It's not only feelings, because some people don't really have a good handle on talking about their feelings. This is especially true for men. We've not given them an opportunities for them to really take out their feelings, look at them and explore them like we do with girls. And that's starting to change. You see many more men being willing to talk about how they feel about things. And that's an important activity. But it's still difficult for some folks to talk about. However, the activities associated with love speak much louder than words sometimes. There are clearly some situations that don't look like love at all, and they usually involve violence, unwanted violence, or force or fear. Those are not love. That's not, people can call it love, but it isn't. It's something quite different. And just remember that actions always speak louder than words. And sometimes our words, a hurtful word is worth 10,000 acts of kindness. So it can undo 10,000 acts of kindness. We need to be careful about how we approach disagreements in love relationships. We can expect some acceptance for our momentary lapse, but if they're chronic, it's going to have a very negative effect on a love relationship. And I'll talk more about that when we talk about communication. Can you go to the next slide, please? Intimacy is an interesting word. I like to call it into see me, which is what it's about. We want to build and strengthen this, but it really means being able to share something about yourself. And this can be a problem for people who have had trauma. It can be a barrier to intimacy, and it really is something that needs to be worked on, probably with professionals. But you need to keep yourself safe. So it's understandable that you may have some trouble sharing some intimate details about your life. There is also the issue of like, how much do I share about my sexual history, or how much do I share about my health, like my HIV status, or previous STDs, or previous sex work, for instance, or my sobriety, or my relapses. How much do you feel safe and sharing? Not everything has to be shared. Some things, sometimes it's best to just keep yourself safe until you're really sure about who you are and what you're doing. But the more you can let people in to see who you are, the more accepting and you see that they're accepting of who you are and your history, it will actually enhance your relationship. Next slide. I got these components of love from several different sources, and I just always thought they were wonderful. And if you were trying to understand what intimacy really was about, if you love someone, you're trying to promote your partner's welfare. You see, I worked for a man who used to do childcare and help type his wife's papers for school because she was trying to get a degree. They had 5 children, and he was working they were both working, and she was the 5 kids, and he was helping her as much as he could to help her get her degree. This is the kind of, you're promoting your partner's welfare. You're happy when you're with that partner. They're not responsible for your happiness, but you do have moments where you feel that there's great joy and it's fun to be with your partner. You hold your partner in some high regard. And I cringe at some social interactions that I've seen between partners where someone takes a cheap shot against their partner by calling them, I don't know, I have someone who used to call his wife Corky because she didn't have his sophistication. I just like, I don't think that that's holding your partner in high regard. Someone who takes a cheap shot is, you need to look out for that, especially, like when you're courting and they're doing that, it'll only get worse when they become more committed in a partnership. You need to be able to count on your partner in times of need. That means if I call and say, oh, somebody near and dear to me just died, that you'll be there to help me and support me, and that you hate funerals, but you'll come to the funeral with me. This is the kind of thing that you count on from partners to be able to do. Or and that the other, understanding each other. You see some people who are partners for long term, they can finish each other's thoughts. They know what the other person's going to do under certain circumstances. And it's always actually fun to watch because they just know each other so well. Next slide. You are willing to share yourself and your possessions with your partner. I had a clergy once tell me this story. He was doing premarital counseling with a couple. And when they got to talking about finances, the groom announced that he did not want to share finances with his bride, and that he would keep separate financial accounts. He did not want her to know about what he had in terms of his money. That relationship did not last. And he thought that was, like, you, at some point, you have to trust that other person enough to share some of that financial, your financial well-being is dependent on the couple working together. I can understand if you have some reserve because that person has had a history of not being able to manage their money, but that's something that you also need to work on and share. The receiving emotional support from your partner whenever needed. You've had a bad day. You need to be quiet. You don't want to hear about anybody or anything because you've had such a rough day, and they understand that, and they give you your time to be alone. Or you sit and listen. You don't need advice. I just need someone to listen to me while I vent. And that's really important too. Not only giving emotional support, but also being able to receive it. Being able to say, look, I know you had a rough day. Why don't you go sit in front of the TV with a beer for a little, with a iced tea, or go sit out on the deck with an iced tea for a little while and just look at the sunset. And I'll bring a plate for dinner out to you so you can have some time to think. Those are being able to receive that, being able to accept that support from your partner is important as well. Being able to talk about intimate things with your partner. At some point, if you're looking at a long-term commitment, there is going to be a need to talk about, well, I don't like this, but I do like that sexually. If you've had some trauma, for instance, there might be a sexual activity that you don't want to do because it reminds you of the trauma. And so you're going to need to be able to talk about that. Or that there is some quirky things that you do that really put me off, like leaving your dirty underwear on the floor. Those are things that we have to be able to talk about if we're living together and we're going to share a household. And finally, valuing your partner's presence in your life. They are there, and I am grateful for their presence. They have really added to my life, and they add to my family. These are all characteristics of what we're looking for in long-term relationships. For hooking ups, none of this is going to be true because you're not really looking for any of this. You're not looking for emotional support. You're just there for passion. You're there for a sexual activity. But all these other things, if you're looking for long-term commitment, they become important. Can I have the next slide, please? Love and sex, up too far. Go back. Oh, there you go. Sexuality and love are intimately related in our culture especially with long-term relationships. Our language connects love and sex a lot. Think about all the old standards. all the 50s and 60s music that we grew up on. I just like there's some wonderful music out there that's fun. Like think about Tony Bennett and Lady Gaga doing an album together. They did a duo album and it was fabulous, but it was about sex and love, you know. And here are these two people from totally two different generations talking about doing love songs. Sexual satisfaction is tied to relationship satisfaction. Although I have to say that there are couples who don't have a good sex life, but they have a great relationship and they've been able to work that out. For some reason, the sexual satisfaction is not there for a lot of different reasons. And but the rest of the relationship, they've been able to work it out. And then there are some people who have great sex together and they don't like each other. And they don't get along. And it's really hard for them to reconcile that the relationship isn't good, but the sex is great. And those are relationships, and both of those relationships can be a trial. But if people are committed, they try to work them out. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. But sexual satisfaction is really tied to relationship satisfaction in the data. There are also some cultural and environmental issues associated with sex. And I'm going to talk about those in the next section when I talk about what makes for good sex. These issues around sexuality and love are, when I talk about them, most of the time I'm talking about long-term relationships and committed relationships. Hooking up is a different story. People are there. If you see it with young people especially, there's a lot more, people have always done it. But there's a lot more opportunities for people to be able to do it, and they're more open about it. They're more honest about it. Like so, Ben's friends with benefits and using hooking up apps like Tinder rather. These are things that people have always been wanted to do and have been doing. They're just more open about it, and it's probably safer for them to be open and honest about what they're doing. At least they know what they're doing. They're being open, they're being honest, and they're more likely to do things to protect themselves, like make sure that they use condoms or are in a safe environment. And that's the end of session 2.